Today's subject is workflow advanced actions, and I'm actually using DDM to manage the workshops as we deliver them, and I've created a set of actions. So I'm actually using an NPD style folder, and we can see here that this is my workshop folder. If I'm looking in the preview pane, we've got all the typical attributes, etc. And an action is a sub folder of a top level folder. So the topics that we will cover is what is an action, manually creating actions, automatically adding actions by the workflow, the action list. I'm going to set up a new one so we can see how it works, and I'm going to go through some timeout rules. So what is an action? Well, I've got my NPD folder here. If I open it into its own window, we have an actions tab across the middle splitter bar. And in here, subject to your configuration and your access controls, you can create sub-actions within a folder. So we use folders for managing business processes such as product development, change orders, non-conformance, corrective action. So any business process can be broken down into a set of actions, and those actions can be assigned to different groups and users. Okay, so as you can see here, I've got my NPD project, and I've manually created a set of tasks. The out-of-the-box action types that are available are milestones, requirements, tasks, approvals, decisions, assumptions, concessions, risks, issues, opportunities. I've created 2 extra action types here, which are for purchase requisition and scheduled tasks. So this is just my little sort of sandpit play area. But these initial 10 should be available out of the box. Okay. If you don't see anything in this drop down, then it's probably to do with your DDM configuration. If I hop back here, and I'm going to drop into the admin tool, because against each different business process folder type, if I just drop in here, we can have a look. So if I go to folders in admin, folder types, for an NPD development project, you can specify against the folder definition what the allowed content types are. And as you can see here, I've got all of the action types switched on. So if you turn any of them off, you won't be able to create them in that folder type. Okay. So what you also need is you need to be in the correct groups, and your groups need to have access controls, for example, against folder tasks. So engineering have got access controls for folder tasks. So it's all subject to the normal access controls. Okay, basic access controls are covered under the standard DDM training. Okay, right. So what is an action? An action, as I said, is a sub-action of a business process. Okay, I'm going to set this as complete, like so. So I can change the status of an action. What I could do, I'm just going to roll the status back here. If I go back to, let's say, in progress, against an action, you might want to specify what is the due date. So maybe we need this finishing by Friday. Okay, you can also allocate and log time against actions, and you can assign an action to a particular user. So I've chosen assign to, and let's say I'm going to assign this action to engineering, assign it to Stuart and say, please do this. So this is just a manual action. The fact that that's been assigned to me now means that it will appear in my action list that we're going to have a little look at later. So let's say we'll leave that as in progress, manually adding actions. Okay, in order to demonstrate this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to clear my screen and create a new NPD folder. So development project, and we're just going to call this workshop advanced folder actions. Okay, so I've created my new development project, and I've got my predefined dividers. We've got our workflow, and at this point there are no actions in the folder. Now I'm going to take it to the project planning step of the workflow. I'm going to assign it to myself and step forward. So it might be that when you're planning your project, you might want to break this down into a set of requirements. Maybe we need to do 100 miles per hour, and you hit return, and it can automatically create your actions for you. So I've just created 2 actions. Now clearly I'm adding these manually within the folder as I go forward. Again, if I need to, I can log time, allocate time, and I can assign it to different users, etc. Okay. So I'm going to go back to the main interface. I'm going to refer back to our project. So manually adding actions within a folder. You select the type that you're trying to create, and then you can add it by filling in the details and pressing return. In this tab for actions, they're automatically listed in task order. You can, if you want to, change the task order. You could make that 1 and that 2. So the default view inside here will always be in task order. Okay, so let's say we've completed that. We've talked about manual actions. Automatically added actions, and this is the bit that is all about today, but I just wanted to cover the basics. How do we automatically add an action to a folder as we move through the workflow? Most businesses, well, all businesses are made up out of processes, and as we run instances of those processes, whether it's a change order or a development project, we could break it down into a set of actions. If we're doing the same actions every time in a process, they can be predefined and therefore automatically triggered as the workflow progresses forward. Okay, so I have an example inside my development project that I've set a rule in my workflow that when I go to feasibility study, okay, it's preventing me moving forward because I have another rule set that says you cannot move forward because the person at this step in the workflow must fill in the compliance requirement field. So I'm going to choose what compliance requirement. Now this is a custom attribute. This is not out of the box, and you can build these custom attributes. And let's say we need reach, ROSH and CE marking. So I've populated this multi-select field, and therefore in my workflow I can move forward. Now, as I just said, I've configured my workflow so that as I move forward in the workflow, it will automatically create the actions that so these 4 actions have been created automatically based on what's been defined against the workflow template. They've been predefined, and also which department, which group they should be assigned to. Okay, so an example of automatic actions. When these automatic actions are generated, and I will show you how to do it in a minute, you can also set it so if I try and move forward in the workflow now, one of those actions is required to be complete before we're allowed to move forward. So out of the 3 actions that were generated automatically, it's only the impact assessment that needs to be completed. If I set that to complete, and that status change is recorded against the audit trail of that particular action, then the workflow will allow me to move forward. Okay. Now, to do what I need to do, the next step, so these other 3 actions are required before you go into concept review. So just to make the demonstration a little quicker, I'm going to set all of these as complete, like so, to make sure we're not missing anything. When I go to concept review, I've also got another automatic action, which is to check the concept design against the original requirements. Okay, so these automatic actions can be used for all sorts of things. Clearly, this is just my example for demonstration. If I say OK to that and move to engineering design, in fact, before I do that, we're going to go to an admin level because we're going to show you the advanced actions that have been configured around this step in the process. If I go back to here, so manually added, automatically added actions, we've had a look at that. Let's say we've done that. Now, just before we do that, we're going to look at my action list. So if you consider that within a business you might have any number of development projects, customer projects, change orders, non-conformance. There could be many, many things that are going through the business at any one time. And each user might have actions that have been assigned to them across many different folders. So rather than having to look into a folder to find out which actions have been assigned to you, in fact, this one here, what I'm going to do is assign this action list 1. I'm going to assign it to myself as a member of engineering. So that one and that one have been assigned to me as the owner. Now, if I come into DDM, there's an option in my favorites that will show me any action in the system that has been assigned to me that is at a non-closed status, i.e. still active. Okay, so what is an action? If I finish and say that it's complete, if I refresh my screen, it will remove it from my outstanding list. Another thing that you can do with your action list, I'm just going to minimize the left-hand panel, is against the folder attributes, there is an option to display the parent folder or the parent name. If I switch the parent description on here, I can see that this task here is a task for that particular project. So I'm seeing the action description and the parent folder description in the same action list. Okay, so my action list, really useful. You can also in here look at actions specifically owned by you, group owned, actions that you've pinned, and actions where you're the person who's been deemed accountable. Accountable, which is an attribute against most folder types here. We can see responsible, accountable, consultation, and information. So that's my action list. And again, so let me just go back. If I say this is in progress, this is my project. And if I look at the actions, we can see that that is in progress. If I go back to my action list and I set that as complete, and go back here, clearly against the project we can see that it's been completed. Okay, how do we configure these? Now, against my my folder type here, at the design engineering step, I've configured it so on arriving at this step, subject to what is populated in this field, it will automatically create sub-actions. So you can do a check against single or multiple attributes on the parent folder. Now this example, CE, Reach and Roche, when I go to this step, okay, you must add a comment. That's another rule option. Let's add a comment. So on arriving at design engineering, if this attribute is populated with values, go and automatically create a requirement for each one of them. Okay, so when you're setting the rules for the automatic generation of an advanced action, it could be across multiple values in a single attribute or values from multiple attributes. So let's have a look at that, because if I edit the form here, I've got a value in here which is EUMDR. Now I don't currently have that configured, so if I'd have turned that on, it wouldn't work. So I'm going to now configure the workflow so that if I select EUMDR, it will create the action for me. If I turn that on now and I say OK, if I rerun my workflow custom rules, okay, it hasn't created me an action for the EUMDR. So let's go in and configure that. I'm going to go into the DDM administration tool, and we're going to go to the workflow editor. For new product development, I'm going to double click to put me in edit mode. We see the green tick and the red cross at the bottom. Let me just drag this up. So my rule is going to be, on arriving at the design engineering step in the workflow, I'm going to double click and go into edit mode for this. We have a tab here for advanced, and this is where we define the automatic actions that need to be generated. And as you can see here, for the values that appear in that field, we have an automatic action being created. I don't have one for EUMDR. So let's add, well, let's look at one that's already there. Attribute check. If this attribute compliance requirement contains a value of NAS 3611, then I want to create a new action. So it does an attribute check, and if it gets an affirmative, a positive answer, it will then carry out this automatic action creation. So I'm going to add a new one. The rule name, let's make it consistent, is compliance requirement for EUMDR. Okay. Copy. So, what folder type are we currently looking at? We are looking at a development project. Add a check so that if the compliance requirement contains a value of this, then do this action. So that is the attribute check, and we want to add, so I'm just going to say auto add EUMDR, let's call it, just so we can see it. I'm going to name it incorrectly. I'm just going to call it that. Copy. We're going to create a folder requirement. The owner of this new folder will be automatically assigned to EUMDR, which is a quality standard, I believe. Do we notify this group on automatic creation? Do we put the newly generated action automatically into so engineering design actions? Okay, in the audit trail I'm going to put that comment. The description of my folder will be that, and at this point I can also add rules that say you cannot move forward in this workflow to design review if this must be at achieved. So unless this new action has a status of achieved, it cannot move forward in the workflow. Let's see whether I've done this correctly. Okay. Add. Okay. Okay. So, if I go back to my workflow example here, let me refresh the screen. Now, the first thing is, these actions are created automatically on arriving at a step. Now we can see here that I can't go backwards to then go forwards to trigger the custom code, which is why we've added under the edit button the ability to reapply the custom rules. If I reapply the custom rules, it won't create something that's already there. However, it has created my new requirement, which I called auto add workshop EUMDR. So it worked. Okay. If I try and move forward in my workflow to design review, it can't, because I said this particular task must be at a status of achieved. Okay, so that's how you add these basic custom rules and the automatic triggering of actions within a workflow. Okay, now let's go back to our workshop list of tasks. So automatically adding actions, that's how you set them up. Let's say we've completed that. Now another useful thing is you can put a timeout on a workflow step to automatically move forward or move to another step subject to some conditions. Okay, I'm going to use the example of a change order. What's the easiest way to step through this? I'm just going to raise a new change order and say, test, what is the request? What is the reason? Okay, so I'm raising a change order and I want to step through the workflow. Let me assign this to an engineering manager, assign it to myself and step through. I'm going to walk through the workflow because what I want to demonstrate is this step called introduce changes, and you'll see there's a timeout being configured on here. Hold on, we haven't done all of these things, so you must put a value in all of these fields. Again, these are checks to make sure that we're doing all of the right things all of the time. I'm going to do that. David Wright, Technical Director, is accountable. We're going to start this today because we need it on Friday, and I'm going to say OK. Can I now move forward? You must complete the impact assessment. So at this step in my workflow, it triggered an automatic impact assessment task. It must be complete before we move forward. So I'm just going to walk through these now to get to the change introduction. Normally, I would be modifying parts, assemblies, drawings and documents throughout the process, but that's not what today's all about. So I'm just going to step it through here to get to the change introduction step. Okay. So, on arriving at change introduction, if we look behind the scenes for my change order workflow, change introduction step, we are automatically triggering a set of tasks. So the scenario here is we've walked through the change order, we've made the changes, and now we need to set a task for each department to introduce the changes into their area of the business. Against each of these automatic actions, we've said you cannot move forward unless this has been completed. Okay. What we've also done on this step of the workflow is we've applied a rule that says if this is still here after 2 minutes, move forward to closed. Okay. However, if your step contains actions that need to be complete before it's allowed to move forward, although the timeout will get to 2 minutes, it cannot move forward because it still has outstanding tasks. So this is quite useful if you don't want to have to monitor this step in the process. So if I'm here, you send it to change introduction, and you could have it so that it's just owned by the folder archive group. Nobody needs to monitor it, okay, because after 2 minutes, sorry, hold on, I've set a password request on that step. After 2 minutes, it will move forward, but it will only move forward automatically when these actions have been completed. So, just to make it a quicker demo, I've got permission to update all of these. So it basically means you don't have to monitor steps in the workflow if all of the sub-actions are enough to deem it complete. So I've now said each of those actions is now complete. And in the workflow, if I refresh the screen, within 2 minutes, which when you're waiting feels like 2 hours, refresh. So I've just done an F5 on my keyboard to refresh the screen, and as you can see, it's automatically moved forward to the close step. So you can have a timeout rule on any step of a workflow, and subject to the rules that you've set, it can move forward automatically provided the sub-actions are at the right status or meet with the right criteria. There are additional rules that you can apply in XML code, but we're not covering that on today's session. So let me close that off. I'm going to go back to my workshops. Have I left anything else open? I've left these open. Let me just close these. Okay. Advanced workshop. So let's just recap on what we've looked at. What is an action? An action is a subfolder of a parent business process folder. Another rule on actions is an action can only have one parent folder. You can't have an action having 2 different parent folders. You can manually add actions relative to what's been configured against the specific folder type. We can automatically add actions. You can see your actions in your My Action list in your favorites. Incidentally, what you could also do here is in Tools Options, when you start DDM, you could say open in My Action list. So it will open it straight into your action list if that's what you want. Okay. I've shown how we set up automatically added actions, and we've just looked at the ability to set timeout rules so that if all actions are complete, the workflow can automatically move forward.